billionaire CEO discovers his secret daughter after 10 years. You won't believe what happens next. She kept their child hidden until the girl needed his rare blood to survive. This life-or-death emergency reveals the shocking truth. This second-chance romance will melt your heart. Hi, my beloved family. May the divine ignite within every woman an unbreakable spirit, boundless courage, and a soul that radiates pure love. May he crown the mothers who breathe life into existence, the sisters who illuminate our paths, the wives who battle alongside us with fierce devotion, and the daughters who transform our world with their limitless potential. May every woman know her sacred worth, for she is God's masterpiece, a force of creation, and the eternal flame that lights humanity's way. My cherished family, true honor lies in how fiercely we protect and celebrate the women who transform our existence. Without their strength, wisdom, and sacrifice, the world crumbles into darkness, emptiness, and despair. Shield them, worship their brilliance, and treasure them as life's greatest gifts. If this ignites your soul, just 2 seconds to like and comment. Your love means everything. If your heart is true, write, present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Some storms destroy everything in their path, while others clear the ground for something magnificent to grow. And tonight, love itself would be tested by the kind of tempest that reshapes entire destinies. The Seattle rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Matt Clark's penthouse like tears from a broken sky, each drop carrying the weight of impending heartbreak and the kind of finality that changes everything forever. The storm had been building all day, beginning as a gentle mist that gradually intensified into the kind of torrential downpour that turned city streets into rivers and made even the most hardened Pacific Northwest residents seek shelter indoors. At 25, he commanded Clark Technologies with the confidence of someone born to lead, had graced magazine covers as Seattle's youngest tech mogul, and possessed wealth that could buy anything his heart desired, except the courage to fight for what mattered most. His corner office on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center offered panoramic views of the city he was helping to reshape through innovation and strategic investments. But tonight, those same views reminded him of how small he felt when measured against forces beyond his control. Tonight, however, standing in his luxurious space overlooking Elliott Bay, he felt powerless against the storm raging inside his chest. A tempest more destructive than any weather Seattle had ever witnessed, more devastating than any business crisis he'd navigated during his meteoric rise to prominence. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who could predict market trends and navigate complex negotiations felt completely helpless when facing the most important decision of his personal life. Paisley Washington stood silhouetted against the amber glow of his marble fireplace like a goddess carved from dreams and starlight, her natural crown of curls catching the dancing flames in a way that made each strand seem alive with its own inner fire. She wore the simple black dress he'd bought her in Paris during their weekend getaway last month, when they'd talked about opening a European office, and she'd sketched marketing strategies on cafe napkins that had later become the foundation for a campaign worth millions. Her dark skin possessed a luminescence that seemed to absorb and reflect the warmth simultaneously, creating an ethereal beauty that made Matt's breath catch every time he looked at her, even after 8 months of falling deeper in love each day. The way she moved through space suggested someone completely comfortable in her own body, confident in her place in the world, despite having grown up with far fewer advantages than the wealthy socialites who populated his usual social circles. At 22, she possessed a fierce intelligence that intimidated executives twice her age, a creative vision that had revolutionized marketing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, and a gentle strength that could heal wounded souls or move mountains through sheer determination. Her portfolio already included campaigns for Microsoft, Starbucks, and Amazon, achievements that most marketing professionals took decades to accumulate, if they ever achieved them at all. She moved through the world with grace that spoke of inner confidence rather than performed elegance, carrying herself like someone who understood her own worth without needing external validation. The first time he'd introduced her at a Clark Technologies board dinner, she'd engaged the most conservative members in conversations about sustainable business practices that had them nodding in agreement before they realized they were discussing topics they'd previously dismissed as impractical idealism. She was everything he'd never known he needed, everything he'd searched for without realizing he was searching, everything that made him want to become better than the privileged heir his father had groomed him to be. She challenged him intellectually, inspired him creatively, and loved him with a fierce devotion that had transformed his understanding of what it meant to truly live rather than simply exist in comfort and predictability. And tonight, he was about to lose her through his own cowardice, through his inability to choose love over the expectations of people whose approval had always defined his sense of self-worth. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "Paisley," Matt said, his voice strained like a violin string about to snap. He paced the length of his living room like a caged animal, his Italian leather shoes clicking against imported marble in a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat and growing desperation. "The board meets tomorrow morning. The Nakamura merger depends on their confidence in my leadership, my stability, my ability to represent Clark. Technologies on the international stage without creating complications that could jeopardize international relationships. The merger would transform his regional success into a global empire, establishing Clark Technologies as a major player in the international tech industry, rather than just another successful Pacific Northwest startup. But it required unanimous board support and the kind of personal image that conservative Japanese investors found reassuring: traditional family structures, established social connections, and the kind of predictable lifestyle that suggested stability in both business and personal matters. His relationship with Paisley, however genuine and meaningful, represented the kind of unpredictability that made conservative investors nervous. She wasn't from their world of inherited wealth and established social hierarchies, hadn't attended the right schools, or belonged to the appropriate clubs, couldn't trace her family lineage through generations of American business aristocracy. "I don't care what your board expects." Paisley's voice carried the power of thunder rolling across mountains, beautiful and terrifying in its intensity. She turned from the fireplace to face him fully, her eyes blazing with fire that could forge diamonds or melt steel. "I care about us, Matt, about what we've built together over these past 8 months, about the love that keeps me awake at night, planning our future, dreaming about the life we could create together if you'd stop letting other people's opinions matter more than your own heart." The space between them felt like an ocean of unspoken words, unfulfilled promises, and the kind of love that poets spent lifetimes trying to capture in inadequate verse. They'd met at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, where she'd been lead event coordinator, commanding respect from everyone in the ballroom without effort, orchestrating an evening for 500 guests with the precision of a conductor and the grace of an artist. When she'd smiled at him across that crowded room, her face glowing with satisfaction from an event that had raised more money than any previous gala in the hospital's history, his world had shifted permanently. He'd watched her handle crisis after crisis throughout the evening, a kitchen fire that threatened the dinner service, a keynote speaker who arrived 3 hours late, a sound system failure that could have ruined the auction, with calm competence that had impressed him more than any business presentation he'd ever witnessed. Their first conversation had lasted until sunrise, covering everything from quantum physics to social justice, from their shared love of obscure jazz musicians to their dreams of using technology to solve environmental problems. She'd challenged his assumptions about privilege and responsibility, opened his eyes to perspectives he'd never considered, and inspired him to think beyond profit margins toward impact and legacy that would outlast quarterly earnings reports. The months that followed had been the happiest of his life. Quiet dinners in small restaurants where they could talk for hours without interruption. Weekend trips to places that weren't designed for wealthy tourists. Conversations that revealed the depth of her intellect and the beauty of her soul. She'd introduced him to communities where people built wealth through cooperation rather than competition, challenged him to use his resources for purposes beyond personal advancement and social status accumulation. What we have is... Matt stopped mid-sentence, the words dying like flowers touched by unexpected frost. He loved her, desperately, completely, irrevocably, but love felt like a luxury he couldn't afford when billion-dollar deals hung in the balance of board. Approval and international partnerships required the kind of social compatibility that his relationship with Paisley complicated in ways that could affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in investments. It's complicated, Paisley. My world, your world, they don't align in ways that matter to people who control the future of my company and everyone who depends on it for their livelihoods. Are you breaking up with me? Her voice became barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a landslide that could reshape entire mountain ranges. The question hung between them like a blade, suspended by the thinnest thread, sharp enough to sever everything they'd built together over 8 months of discovering that love could be both passionate and profound, both exciting and peaceful. Matt closed his eyes, feeling like a man standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing he was about to jump and destroy everything beautiful in his life for the sake of maintaining relationships with people whose approval had always mattered more than his own happiness. The coward's way out stretched before him like a highway to emotional nowhere, paved with regret that would haunt him forever and lined with the ghosts of roads not taken. I think, he began, then stopped, unable to voice the words that would destroy everything they'd created together. I think we both knew this was temporary. The sound of her palm connecting with his face echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot, sharp and final and absolutely deserved. Paisley grabbed her coat with movements that spoke of barely controlled fury and infinite dignity, her hands trembling slightly, but her spine remaining straight as forged steel. Temporary. She laughed, but the sound held no humor, only pain distilled to its purest form. You're right, Matt. Some things are temporary. Your courage, for instance. Your integrity. Your chance to be the man I thought you were instead of the frightened boy you're choosing to remain. She moved toward the door with fluid grace, her head held high despite tears threatening to spill from eyes that had looked at him with such trust just minutes before. At the threshold, she paused without turning around, her silhouette framed against the hallway light like a portrait of everything he was choosing to lose. I had something important to tell you tonight, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Something that would have changed everything between us, something beautiful and terrifying and perfect all at once. Something that would have given you a reason to be brave instead of safe. Her words hit him like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of missed opportunities and roads not taken, of futures that would now never exist because of his inability to choose love over fear. But men who call love temporary don't deserve to hear about miracles, don't deserve to know about gifts that transform ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. The door closed behind her with the soft finality of a book-ending mid-sentence, leaving Matt alone with echoes of what he'd just destroyed and the devastating silence that followed moments of irreversible choice. He sank into his leather chair, staring at the space where she'd stood, unaware that the woman he'd lost was carrying the most precious gift he'd ever unknowingly received. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the city, but inside Matt's penthouse, A different kind of devastation had taken hold, the kind that comes from choosing fear over love, safety over magnificence, the approval of strangers over the heart of the woman who could have been his everything. 20 floors below, Paisley sat in her car with both hands pressed against her still flat stomach, making a vow that would shape the next decade of her life. Any man who could discard love so easily didn't deserve to know about the miracle growing inside her. She would build a fortress of strength around herself and her unborn child, would create success that proved love didn't require anyone else's validation, would raise a child who understood that temporary was just another word for people who lacked the courage to choose forever. What Matt Clark didn't know as he sat alone in his expensive penthouse was that his definition of temporary was about to become someone else's definition of forever, and that the greatest love story of his life was just beginning, 10 years too late. Chapter 2. Life without him. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. The most brilliant diamonds are created under crushing pressure, and the most powerful women are built from the ashes of their greatest heartbreaks, rising like phoenixes with wings made of determination. 10 years had transformed Paisley Washington from a heartbroken girl into a force of nature who commanded boardrooms across 3 continents and regularly appeared on lists of the most influential entrepreneurs under 40. The modest studio apartment she'd moved into, while pregnant, had been replaced by a stunning 2-bedroom condo that reflected success earned through relentless effort rather than inherited privilege. Washington. Digital Dynamics occupied 3 floors of downtown, Seattle's most prestigious business tower, its glass walls displaying awards from every major advertising organization and photographs of Paisley shaking hands with CEOs whose companies appeared regularly in international headlines. She'd built her empire from her kitchen table during late-night feeding sessions, transforming her background in event coordination into a digital marketing powerhouse that Fortune 500 companies waited months to hire. Her innovative campaigns had revolutionized how brands connected with consumers, creating authentic relationships that transcended traditional advertising boundaries. Her client list included technology giants seeking to humanize their brands, luxury companies wanting to reach younger demographics, and social impact organizations needing to amplify their messages across global platforms. "Mama, why do I have different eyes than you?" 10-year-old Adelia asked, looking up from her advanced mathematics homework spread across their dining table like the strategic plans of a young general preparing to conquer academic worlds. Paisley's heart performed its familiar dance of pride and pain whenever she looked into those eyes, green gold like autumn leaves caught in afternoon sunlight, exactly the shade that had once made her lose herself completely during stolen moments of happiness that felt like lifetimes ago. The resemblance was so precise, so unmistakable, that she sometimes caught her breath when Adelia looked at her with certain expressions that belonged entirely to the man who'd walked away. "You got them from your daddy, baby," Paisley said, settling beside her daughter with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to navigate conversations requiring diplomatic precision worthy of international negotiations. Even after 10 years, discussing Matt required emotional surgery, careful incisions that honored truth without inflicting damage, that acknowledged Adelia's right to know about her father without burdening her with adult complications involving rejection and abandonment that a child shouldn't carry. "Why did he have to go away?" Adelia asked, the question that had appeared in various forms throughout her young life, each iteration revealing her growing sophistication and deeper need to understand her place in a world where most families included 2 parents sharing responsibilities. Paisley knelt beside her daughter, smoothing the soft curls that represented perfect genetic blending Matt's thickness combined with her own natural pattern, creating something uniquely beautiful that belonged entirely to this remarkable child. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people they love, Paisley explained, choosing words with surgical precision. But that doesn't mean you weren't wanted, warrior princess. You're the most wanted, most loved little girl in the entire world, and nothing will ever change that fundamental truth. The term warrior princess had emerged during Adelia's toddler years when she'd shown remarkable resilience facing childhood challenges, approaching obstacles with determination that suggested she'd inherited the best qualities from both parents. It had become their special connection, a reminder that strength and gentleness could coexist beautifully. Adelia nodded with solemnity beyond her years, processing information with analytical precision that made her teachers recommend gifted programs. Then she brightened with childhood's emotional resilience, their ability to compartmentalize difficult feelings and focus on immediate possibilities for joy. "Can we make pancakes for dinner?" she asked, her mood shifting with the speed that characterized childhood's weather patterns. "Pancakes for dinner it is, warrior princess," Paisley agreed, knowing their unconventional meal choices had become family traditions that would probably embarrass Adelia during teenage years and comfort her during adult ones. As Adelia cheered and raced toward the kitchen, Paisley allowed herself one moment of retrospection, a luxury she rarely indulged because looking backward too often made forward progress more difficult. Their life had been built from that devastating night, constructed through determination, sleepless nights, and love that could move mountains when channeled through persistent effort. The early years had tested every assumption about single parenthood. While pregnant, Paisley had worked 16-hour days, saving every penny while building business plans during precious hours when exhaustion allowed clear thinking. She'd given birth with only her doula present, held her daughter for the first time without anyone to share the miracle, and made every major decision as a party of one, bearing complete responsibility for another human being's welfare. But those years had also been filled with magic that Matt would never understand. First smiles shared during 3 a.m. feedings when the world belonged entirely to them. First steps taken in their tiny living room while Paisley cheered from her laptop designing campaigns. First words including mama, spoken with such pure love that Paisley had cried for an hour. Adelia had grown into someone extraordinary, brilliant like her father but grounded in values. Paisley had instilled through endless bedtime stories featuring strong characters, weekend adventures in museums and nature preserves, conversations that treated her like the intelligent person she was, rather than a child to be patronized. She spoke French and Spanish fluently, played violin with skill that impressed professionals, excelled in mathematics with natural ability that had teachers recommending specialized programs, and possessed emotional intelligence that consistently amazed adults. But more importantly, she understood kindness, demonstrated empathy, and approached challenges with optimism tempered by realistic understanding of effort required for success. "Mama, Mrs. Rodriguez says I might qualify for the university mathematics program," Adelia called from the kitchen, arranging ingredients with methodical precision that spoke to inherited organizational skills. "She says my problem-solving approaches are showing graduate-level thinking patterns, and they have a program where gifted children can take college courses while staying with their age groups for social development." "What do you think about that?" Paisley asked, following her daughter and marveling at how someone so young possessed such mature decision-making capabilities. "I think it sounds exciting, but I want to research what it means first," Adelia replied, demonstrating the analytical caution that would serve her well throughout life. "I don't want to miss important experiences with my friends, but I also don't want to be bored in classes that move too slowly for how my brain works." The wisdom in that response reminded Paisley daily that she'd raised someone special, not despite Matt's absence, but perhaps because of it. Adelia had learned early that she could depend on herself and her mother, that hard work produced results, that love came from consistency rather than grand gestures that disappeared when circumstances became challenging. Their evening routine had been perfected over years of practice. Homework completed at the dining table, while Paisley prepared dinner, often fielding business calls from international clients operating in different time zones. Dinner conversation covered everything from Adelia's school projects to Paisley's latest strategic challenges, treating the 10-year-old as a valued consultant whose insights often revealed perspectives that adult experts missed. "Tell me about your day, warrior princess," Paisley said as they settled with their pancakes, a tradition that had started when Adelia was 3 and learning complete sentences. "Emma Chen asked why I don't have a dad like other kids," Adelia reported matter-of-factly. "I told her that families come in different shapes, and ours is perfect the way it is. Then I explained that having one really amazing parent who's always there is better than having 2 parents who don't know how to work together or make each other happy." The casual way Adelia delivered this information spoke volumes about the confidence Paisley had instilled. Over years of careful conversations, there was no shame, no sense of lacking something essential, just acceptance of their reality and pride in what they'd built together. As they cleaned up with synchronized efficiency, Paisley reflected on the empire she'd built, not just her business success, but their life together. Every decision had prioritized Adelia's well-being, every sacrifice had proven worthwhile, and every sleepless night had contributed to something magnificent. The irony wasn't lost that Matt's rejection had ultimately created something more valuable than his acceptance could have produced. His absence had forced her to discover strength she hadn't known she possessed, to build success on her own terms, to raise a daughter who understood that love wasn't conditional on other people's approval. But neither of them knew that across the city, the man who had walked away 10 years ago was about to crash back into their perfectly constructed world in the most unexpected way possible, bringing with him the opportunity for healing that neither had dared to imagine could ever exist. Chapter 3. The Crisis. Sometimes fate delivers its most important messages through the voices of emergency room doctors and the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time, reminding us that all the success in the world means nothing when the person you love most needs something you cannot provide alone. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday that had begun like any other extraordinary day in their carefully constructed life, starting with morning coffee shared over advanced mathematics problems, a goodbye kiss that tasted of strawberry lip balm and childhood innocence, and Paisley's usual maternal reminder for Adelia to learn something amazing today and remember that you're capable of changing the world. It arrived during the most critical moment of a high-stakes presentation for Microsoft's new sustainability initiative, a campaign worth $12 million that could establish Washington Digital Dynamics as the premier environmental marketing firm on the West Coast. Paisley had been explaining her revolutionary approach to authentic storytelling when her assistant knocked with an expression that immediately transformed routine business into the moment when everything changed forever. "Mrs. Washington." The voice belonged to Mrs. Patterson, Lincoln Elementary's administrative coordinator, but her usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by the carefully controlled tone that school officials used when delivering news that would shatter a parent's world. "This is regarding Adelia. She collapsed during lunch recess and is currently conscious but experiencing symptoms that require immediate medical evaluation. The paramedics are recommending emergency transport to Seattle Children's Hospital for comprehensive testing and treatment." The words hit Paisley like physical blows delivered by an invisible attacker, each syllable carrying the weight of every parent's worst nightmare. The phone call, that transforms an ordinary day into a crisis that could redefine everything. Her presentation materials scattered across the conference table like leaves caught in a windstorm as she grabbed her purse and keys with movements operating on pure maternal instinct. "Reschedule everything indefinitely," she told her assistant, her voice carrying the kind of authority that moved mountains and made impossible things happen through sheer determination. "Cancel this week, next week, whatever it takes. Nothing exists except getting to Adelia as quickly as humanly possible." The Microsoft executives, powerful individuals accustomed to being the most important people in any room, immediately stepped aside, recognizing they'd witnessed something far more significant than business negotiations. They'd seen maternal love in its purest, most powerful form, and every parent among them understood that presentations happened when children were safe. Not one moment before, the drive to Seattle Children's Hospital became a blur of traffic laws bent to their breaking point and prayers whispered to any deity willing to listen to a mother's desperate pleas. Paisley's hands gripped the steering wheel with enough force to leave permanent impressions while her mind cycled through every possible scenario, each one testing her ability to maintain enough composure to drive safely while her universe collapsed. She'd spent 10 years protecting Adelia from every conceivable harm, creating safe environments and careful routines designed to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. She'd researched schools with military precision, chosen neighborhoods based on safety statistics, maintained meticulous medical records that would make emergency treatment more efficient in any crisis. But all her preparation felt completely inadequate facing a medical emergency that had struck without warning during what should have been the safest part of Adelia's day. How could anything dangerous happen at elementary school, surrounded by teachers and administrators? Seattle Children's Hospital materialized through her windshield like a beacon of hope and terror combined, its familiar brick facade housing both miracles and heartbreak in equal measure. Paisley abandoned her car and ran through automatic doors with the desperate urgency of a mother whose entire universe hung in the balance. "I'm looking for Adelia Washington," she announced to the reception desk, her voice somehow remaining steady despite the earthquake in her chest. 10 years old, brought by ambulance from Lincoln Elementary approximately 30 minutes ago. "I'm her mother." The next 20 minutes passed in slow motion that characterizes life-altering emergencies, where seconds feel like hours and simple tasks become monumental challenges. Emergency waiting areas filled with other families experiencing their own crises, the distinct smell of antiseptic mixed with fear and hope, the constant sound of medical professionals moving with purposeful urgency. Mrs. Washington, a nurse, appeared with professional compassion that could either deliver hope or destroy worlds. "I'm Sarah, coordinating Adelia's care. She's stable and asking for you repeatedly, which is always positive in pediatric cases. Can I see her? Is she okay? What happened?" The questions tumbled out faster than reasonable response time, driven by maternal desperation and need for information that could calm fears or confirm nightmares. "Absolutely. She's in exam room 7 just down this corridor. Dr. Kim is conducting preliminary evaluations." "Mama?" Adelia's voice called from behind a partially closed curtain, weak but unmistakably her daughter's tone, carrying just enough strength to restart Paisley's heart. The sight of her fierce, brilliant, beautiful daughter looking small and vulnerable in a hospital bed triggered every protective instinct Paisley possessed. Adelia's normally vibrant complexion appeared pale against white hospital linens, her green-gold eyes reflecting confusion despite obvious attempts to appear brave. "I'm here, baby," Paisley said, immediately taking her daughter's hand. "I'm here, and we're going to figure out exactly what's wrong and fix it completely. My stomach hurt really bad during lunch. Then everything got spinny and weird," Adelia explained, with clinical precision inherited from both parents. "One minute I was playing four-square with Emma and Marcus. The next minute, I was on the ground with teachers asking questions I couldn't answer because my brain felt disconnected. Dr. Patricia Kim emerged from consulting with her medical team, carrying a tablet filled with preliminary results and wearing the professional compassion that experienced pediatrician's master when delivering potentially devastating news to parents whose worlds revolve around their children's well-being. Mrs. Washington, I'm Dr. Kim. Overseeing Adelia's care since arrival, she began, settling beside Adelia's bed with practiced efficiency. The immediate good news is she's stable with strong vital signs, responding well to supportive treatment. However, her blood work shows concerning abnormalities requiring immediate attention. What kind of abnormalities? Paisley asked, feeling like she stood at the edge of a precipice overlooking unknown medical possibilities. Her complete blood count shows irregularities in red blood cell structure, suggesting a possible inherited blood disorder. Dr. Kim explained, pulling up digital charts displaying cellular structures and genetic markers. We suspect hereditary spherocytosis, which affects how red blood cells maintain shape and carry oxygen. It's genetic, typically manifesting during childhood, often triggered by physical stress or growth spurts. The word genetic hit Paisley like a physical blow, carrying implications extending far beyond immediate medical concerns into territory she'd avoided for 10 years. Genetic meant family history, meant inherited traits, meant the one person who shared Adelia's DNA and could provide medical information doctors needed. Is it serious? What treatment does she need? Paisley asked, gripping the bedrail while maintaining outward composure that had carried her through a decade of single parenthood. The condition is very manageable with proper medical care, Dr. Kim replied reassuringly. Many people with hereditary spherocytosis live completely normal, healthy lives with minimal intervention. However, specific treatment protocols depend on understanding the exact genetic variant involved. She paused, preparing to deliver information that would complicate an already difficult situation. We need comprehensive genetic testing to determine the specific type Adelia has inherited, which guides treatment decisions. This requires genetic material from both parents to establish patterns and compatibility for potential interventions. The room tilted as implications became crystal clear. Understanding Adelia's complete genetic profile meant acknowledging the existence of the man who'd walked away before learning. He'd become a father. We'll need to test family members to find compatible donors and understand hereditary patterns, Dr. Kim continued, urgency underlying her clinical tone. Time is important, Mrs. Washington. The sooner we establish her genetic baseline and identify compatible blood types, the more effectively we can treat her condition. Paisley stared at her daughter's face, seeing Matt's eyes looking back with absolute trust, waiting for her mother to solve this problem the way she'd solved every other challenge through determination and effort. But this wasn't a problem that could be fixed with late-night work sessions or strategic planning. This required something she'd sworn never to ask for, help from the man who'd broken her heart and abandoned their family before it began. That's incredibly complicated, Paisley managed, the understatement of the decade delivered in barely audible voice. I understand family situations can be challenging, Dr. Kim replied with practiced compassion. But Mrs. Washington, your daughter's condition is serious. We're talking about her long-term health and potentially her life. Is there any way to contact Adelia's father? The question hung in the air, like a challenge to everything Paisley had built, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed life she'd created through sheer determination. But some battles can't be fought alone, even by the strongest queens who've spent 10 years convincing themselves they don't need anyone else's help. Especially when the life hanging in the balance belongs to the person they love more than their own existence. Chapter 4. The Reluctant Call. Pride becomes a luxury that parents discover they can't afford when their child's life hangs in the balance of a single phone call. And courage is redefined as the willingness to swallow everything that once mattered in service of what matters most. For 4 agonizing days, Paisley maintained her vigil beside Adelia's hospital bed while medical teams conducted test after test, each procedure designed to understand her daughter's condition and determine treatment urgency. Sleep became impossible, food lost all appeal, and the outside world faded into irrelevance as her universe contracted to monitor beeps and her daughter's breathing rhythm. The hospital had become her second home, every corner now familiar, the way morning light streamed through windows facing Elliott Bay, the sound of nurses' stations humming with quiet efficiency, the distinctive smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the lingering traces of fear and hope that seemed to permeate pediatric wards worldwide. She'd memorized the shift changes, learned the names of cleaning staff who worked nights, and could navigate the cafeteria's schedule better than most employees. She'd arranged for her assistant to handle all business operations, cancelled meetings worth millions, including the Microsoft sustainability campaign that could have defined her company's future, and turned down opportunities that had taken months to develop, all without hesitation or second thoughts. Her business partners had expressed concern about losing momentum in competitive markets, but their worries seemed insignificant compared to the medical crisis consuming her attention. Nothing mattered except Adelia's health. Nothing existed beyond these hospital walls. Nothing commanded attention except ensuring her daughter received every possible medical advantage that love, resources, and determination could provide. The irony wasn't lost on her that after spending 10 years building a business empire to prove their independence, she was discovering that some battles required surrendering the very self-reliance she'd fought so hard to achieve. Dr. Kim returned each morning with updates that painted an increasingly clear but troubling picture, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask the growing urgency underlying their situation. Genetic testing had confirmed their initial diagnosis. Adelia suffered from hereditary spherocytosis, affecting her red blood cells' ability to maintain proper shape and function effectively within her circulatory system. Without appropriate treatment, the condition would worsen progressively, potentially leading to serious complications including severe anemia, organ damage, and life-threatening crises that required immediate intervention. The medical terminology had become part of Paisley's vocabulary over these 4 days. Hemolysis, reticulocytosis, splenomegaly, words that sounded like a foreign language but described processes happening inside her daughter's body that threatened everything they'd built together. She'd researched the condition obsessively during brief moments when Adelia slept, reading medical journals and case studies until her eyes burned and her head ached from information overload. "I've completed comprehensive genetic analysis on both you and Adelia," Dr. Kim explained during their 4th consultation, spreading medical charts across the small table with precision befitting life-altering information that would determine their family's future direction. The results confirm this condition originates from the paternal bloodline, meaning the genetic mutations responsible were inherited from her father's family history rather than yours. The specific variant we're dealing with shows markers that trace back through several generations, suggesting a well-established genetic lineage. The words hit Paisley, despite her having suspected this outcome since the initial diagnosis. Everything about Adelia that differed from herself, her unique eye color that seemed to change between green and gold depending on lighting, her rare blood type that had made finding compatible donors challenging during previous minor medical procedures, her analytical thinking patterns that approached problems with mathematical precision, all traced back to genetic contributions from the man she'd spent 10 years trying to forget. This particular variant requires donors with very specific genetic markers for optimal treatment, Dr. Kim continued, highlighting genetic analysis sections with the kind of clinical precision that left no room for misinterpretation. We need to test Adelia's father to determine compatibility for potential blood transfusions, understand her condition's full scope, and develop a comprehensive treatment protocol that addresses both immediate needs and long-term management strategies. The doctor paused, her expression shifting to accommodate the complexity of family dynamics that medical school couldn't prepare physicians to navigate. Mrs. Washington, I need to be direct about timing. While Adelia is stable currently, this condition can deteriorate rapidly if we don't establish proper treatment protocols. We're looking at a window of weeks, not months, before intervention becomes critical rather than preventive. Paisley stared at her hands, watching them tremble with exhaustion and accumulated stress from 4 days of maintaining vigilant attention to every medical detail while processing emotional implications that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. 10 years of carefully constructed walls, protecting herself and Adelia from rejection and abandonment, were beginning to crumble under medical necessity and maternal desperation that made all other considerations seem trivial. That's incredibly complicated, doesn't even begin to describe our situation, Paisley said, the understatement delivered in barely audible voice, while her mind raced through scenarios that all seemed to lead to the same inevitable conclusion. I understand family situations can be challenging, especially when there are unresolved issues or complicated histories between parents, Dr. Kim replied diplomatically, her tone suggesting she'd navigated similar conversations before. But Mrs. Washington, your daughter's condition is serious, and we're operating within time constraints that don't allow for extended deliberation. We're talking about her long-term health and potentially her survival if complications develop without proper intervention. That evening, after Adelia had fallen asleep, clutching her beloved stuffed elephant, a toy that had provided comfort through every challenge of her young life, Paisley found herself staring at her phone with the intensity of someone trying to solve an equation determining the universe's fate. The pediatric ward had grown quiet around them, filled with the soft sounds of sleeping children and the distant conversations of night shift nurses ensuring that healing could happen in peace. Matt Clark's contact information remained unchanged after all these years, preserved not from hope for reconciliation, but because deleting it had felt like erasing proof that their relationship had existed, that those months of happiness hadn't been elaborate illusions created by her young heart's desperate need to believe in love that seemed too good to be true. She'd thought about this moment countless times over the decade, imagined scenarios where she might need to contact him for Adelia's sake, rehearsed conversations that seemed adequate until faced with the reality of actually dialing his number. In her imagined versions, she'd always been in control, calling from a position of strength rather than desperate need, able to maintain the emotional distance that had protected them both from further disappointment. The weight of decision pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a hurricane, threatening to crush her beneath considerations that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Calling Matt meant admitting that despite 10 years of successful independence, some battles couldn't be fought alone. It meant acknowledging that her love and determination weren't enough to solve every problem or protect her daughter from every harm that could threaten their carefully constructed world. More terrifyingly, it meant potentially exposing Adelia to rejection from the father she'd never known, opening doors to disappointment that could damage her emotional development in ways that might take years of therapy to address. What if Matt refused help? What if he questioned paternity despite obvious physical resemblance? What if he agreed to testing but wanted nothing to do with actually building a relationship with the remarkable child he'd unknowingly helped create? But not calling meant gambling with her daughter's health. potentially denying Adelia necessary medical treatment because of Paisley's emotional scars and protective instincts that might cause more harm than good. It meant allowing fear to dictate medical decisions that could affect her daughter's entire future, prioritizing her own comfort over Adelia's well-being in ways that violated every principle of motherhood she'd developed. "Mama, are you okay?" Adelia's sleepy voice drifted from the hospital bed, proving children's uncanny ability to sense when parents struggle with monumental decisions, even when they appear to be sleeping peacefully. "I'm fine." "Baby," Paisley lied, moving to smooth Adelia's hair with gentle strokes that had soothed them through countless difficult moments over the years. "Just thinking through some complicated grown-up stuff that requires careful consideration. Is it about my daddy?" Adelia asked with directness that children master before learning to dance around difficult topics, the way adults do when emotions become too complex for honest conversation. The wisdom in her daughter's voice nearly broke Paisley's remaining composure. Even at 10, Adelia possessed emotional intelligence that consistently amazed adults, an ability to cut through complexity and identify core issues that experienced professionals sometimes missed. Dr. Kim mentioned they need to test family members. "And I know it's just you and me in our family," Adelia continued matter-of-factly, demonstrating how carefully she'd been listening to medical conversations and processing information with the analytical skills she'd inherited from both parents. "It might be," Paisley admitted, unable to lie to someone who'd inherited both parents' ability to see through deception with startling clarity and who deserved honesty about decisions that would affect her medical care. "Are you scared to call him?" Adelia asked, her young voice carrying maturity that spoke to their unique relationship built on mutual respect and open communication, even about topics that challenged both their understanding. "Terrified," Paisley admitted, the honesty feeling both liberating and terrifying, like removing armor that had protected her for years but had also prevented her from moving freely through emotional territories that required vulnerability. "But you'll do it anyway, because that's what brave people do," Adelia said, with absolute confidence in her mother's courage and character. "They do scary things when someone they love needs help, even when doing those scary things means risking getting hurt again." The simple faith in her daughter's voice provided the strength Paisley needed to overcome a decade of protective instincts and defensive reactions. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Matt's contact information with hands that shook but moved with increasing determination toward a decision that would change all their lives. How do you tell someone they have a daughter after 10 years of silence? How do you explain a decade of absence in a single phone call? How do you ask for help from someone who defined your relationship as temporary while you carried his child? How do you risk rejection not just for yourself, but for a daughter who deserved better than adult complications that predated her existence? Adelia's voice echoed in her memory from earlier that day. "Mama, am I going to be okay? Will the doctors be able to fix whatever's wrong with me?" The memory of her daughter's trust and faith provided the final push Paisley needed. She dialed with steady fingers, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if it might wake other patients throughout the pediatric ward. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each tone stretching into eternity, while Paisley's heart attempted to escape through her throat, and her mind cycled through every possible response to the conversation she was about to initiate. On the 4th ring, a voice she recognized but hadn't heard in a decade answered with the same confident tone that had once made her pulse race and her knees weaken. "Paisley?" Matt's voice carried surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope, proving that caller ID could deliver emotional shocks that transcended time, distance, and carefully constructed emotional barriers designed to prevent exactly this kind of contact. "Matt." Her voice emerged as steady steel despite the earthquake happening in her chest. I need to see you tomorrow. It's about your daughter." The silence that followed stretched between them like a chasm filled with 10 years of unspoken words, unanswered questions, and the kind of revelation that changes everything instantly, rewriting history and reshaping futures that had seemed permanently settled. What did you say?" Matt's voice carried the tone of someone whose world had just shifted fundamentally, whose understanding of reality had been challenged by 4 words that carried the power to transform everything he thought he knew about his life. "You heard me correctly. Seattle Children's Hospital, room 314, tomorrow at noon. Come alone, and Matt." She paused, gathering courage for what came next, while drawing on reserves of strength she'd built over 10 years of handling crises independently. "Bring identification and be prepared to prove who you are to hospital security. They don't allow unauthorized visitors in pediatric units, and you have no legal standing to see her without my explicit permission." She hung up before he could respond, before she could lose her nerve, before 10 years of pride and protective instincts could cost her daughter the medical treatment she desperately needed. The phone felt heavy in her hands as she set it aside, knowing that she'd just initiated a sequence of events that would change all their lives in ways she couldn't predict or control. But what happens when the past collides with the present, and 10 years of carefully constructed independence crumbles under the weight of 4 words that carry the power to heal everything that once seemed permanently broken? It's about your daughter. Chapter 5. The first meeting, 10 years later. Sometimes the ghosts we've been running from turn out to be the angels we desperately need, arriving precisely when hope seems lost and miracles feel impossible, carrying with them the power to heal wounds we thought were too deep to ever recover from. Matt Clark approached Seattle Children's Hospital like a man walking toward his own execution. Every step weighted with 10 years of accumulated regret and the devastating possibility that he'd missed the most important decade of his life through cowardice and misplaced priorities. His usual confidence, the kind that commanded Clark Technologies' boardrooms and intimidated competitors, had evaporated completely the moment he'd heard Paisley's voice speak for. Words that rewrote his understanding of everything. The sleepless night following her call had been filled with calculations his analytical mind couldn't solve and questions his business acumen couldn't answer. He'd cancelled 3 crucial meetings, postponed the Nakamura merger discussions worth hundreds of millions, and walked away from his executive team without explanation, driven by desperation he'd never experienced. Hospital security required extensive identification verification before allowing him access to the pediatric wing, driver's license, credit card, and a temporary visitor badge that felt heavier than any business contract he'd ever signed. The protocols reminded him that he had no legal standing here, no rights to see whoever waited in room 314. He found Paisley in the hallway outside the room, and the sight of her stopped his heart completely. 10 years had transformed her from the beautiful girl he remembered into something even more magnificent. A woman who wore power like other people wore expensive perfume, whose natural hair was styled in an elegant crown, speaking of confidence earned through battle. She stood with the posture of someone who'd conquered worlds through determination, wearing a tailored blazer that couldn't hide the strength in her shoulders or steel in her spine. The scared 22-year-old was gone, replaced by a force of nature who could probably outmaneuver half the executives in his industry without breaking stride. "She's sleeping," Paisley said without preamble, her voice carrying authority that moved mountains and parted seas. "Room 314, the doctors will explain everything about her medical condition and why your involvement has become medically necessary." "Paisley, I don't understand what's happening," Matt began, his voice carrying confusion and fear he'd never experienced in any business crisis. "You will," she replied, her tone suggesting understanding was both inevitable and potentially devastating. Matt approached room 314 with trembling hands, showing his visitor badge to the nurse who checked his identification against the approved visitor list before allowing entry. Hospital protocols existed for good reason, protecting vulnerable patients from unauthorized access. He pushed open the door and felt his entire world collapse and rebuild itself in the space between heartbeats. The little girl lying in the hospital bed possessed his eyes, not similar to his eyes, but exactly his eyes in every detail. The same unusual green-gold shade he'd inherited from his grandmother, and never seen replicated until this moment. Her hair carried Paisley's natural texture, but in a lighter shade, speaking of genetic blending. Her skin, a beautiful harmony of both parents' contributions. Her facial structure, a perfect combination of features he recognized from mirrors and family photographs spanning generations. She was simultaneously a complete stranger and the most familiar person he'd ever encountered. A living piece of himself he'd never known existed. Breathing proof that love had created life, even as that love was being destroyed. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, sinking into the bedside chair, with legs no longer capable of supporting his weight. "Her name is Adelia," Paisley said from the doorway, her voice carrying 10 years of single motherhood, sleepless nights and love that could reshape mountains. "She's 10 years old. She has your eyes, your analytical mind, your grandmother's smile, and your stubborn determination to solve problems adults think are too complex for children." Matt couldn't form words, couldn't process mathematics that had always come easily. 10 years old meant conception during their relationship, meant she'd been pregnant when he'd walked away, meant he'd abandoned not just the woman he'd loved, but a child he'd never known about. 10 years, he managed, his voice breaking on words, carrying the weight of an entire decade of missed moments. "You left before I could tell you I was pregnant," Paisley said, each word delivered with surgical precision and sledgehammer impact. "I decided that any man who could call our relationship temporary and walk away when faced with pressure didn't deserve to know about the miracle growing inside me." The accusation hit him because it was completely accurate and absolutely justified. He remembered that night with perfect clarity, the rain, the fireplace, the way she'd looked at him with trust, while he'd chosen cowardice over courage. "Why now?" Matt asked, his analytical mind trying to understand timing, while his heart struggled to process the enormity of what he'd missed. "Why are you telling me this now?" Paisley's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing fear beneath her armor of strength. "Because she's sick, Matt. Because the blood condition she inherited from your family's genetic line requires compatibility testing and potential treatment that only you can provide. Because for the first time in 10 years, my love and determination aren't enough to protect her." The words hit him like lightning, illuminating the cosmic justice that had brought him back precisely because of genetics he'd unknowingly contributed. His daughter needed him not because of anything he'd done to earn that privilege, but because of hereditary traits connecting them through biology. "She needs me," he said, the words carrying weight and meaning he'd never experienced in any context. "She needs your blood, your genetic profile, your medical history," Paisley corrected with brutal honesty that refused to romanticize the situation. "Whether she needs you as a person, whether you deserve any relationship with her beyond medical donor, those are different questions, determined by your actions moving forward." As if summoned by their conversation, Adelia stirred in her sleep, eyelids fluttering open to reveal those familiar green-gold eyes now looking directly at Matt with curiosity instead of fear. "Are you my daddy?" she asked with directness only children possess, her young voice carrying a question that would change everything for all three of them. Matt looked at this remarkable child, his child, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The businessman who'd spent years making calculated decisions based on risk assessment disappeared. replaced by a father whose entire existence suddenly revolved around someone he'd just learned existed. "Yes," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to meet you." Adelia studied his face with the same analytical intensity he recognized from mirrors, processing information with inherited intelligence. "Mama said you had to go away before I was born. Are you staying now?" The question cut through every defense he'd ever built, every rationalization for his past choices. This child deserved honesty, deserved someone who would choose her over everything else. "I'm staying," he said, understanding that this commitment was more binding than any contract he'd ever signed. "I'm never leaving you again." "Good," Adelia said with satisfaction, then shifted to lighter topics with childhood's emotional resilience. "I'm really good at math. Mama says I get that from you." "I'd love to see what you're working on," Matt said, marveling at how quickly she'd accepted his presence, how easily she'd made space for him in her carefully ordered world. But the most important lesson was still to come, one that would test everything he thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and whether a man who'd spent 10 years running from responsibility could learn to fight for the family he'd never known he'd lost.